wasn't a detective. She wasn't even supposed to be involved. But when she walked into that police station holding a single forgotten clue, everything changed. Why did no one else see it? And what did it reveal about the case that had everyone stumped? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The rain fell in steady sheets against the tall windows of the Boston Police Department headquarters, transforming Tremont Street into a glistening river of cobblestones. It was the autumn of 1895, and the city wore its gray mantle with an air of melancholy that seemed to seep into the very bones of its buildings. Inside the second-floor office, Detective James Montgomery stood before a cluttered desk, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the scattered reports and photographs that documented the most perplexing case of his career. At 32 years of age, James had built a reputation as one of Boston's most astute investigators. His dark hair, always neatly combed, framed a face marked by strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds. Those who worked with him spoke of his methodical approach, his ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. Yet this case had him stumped, and he could feel the weight of failure pressing down upon his broad shoulders like a physical burden. The disappearance of Senator Aldrich's daughter, Miss Victoria Aldrich, had occurred 3 weeks prior. The young woman, barely 23 years of age, had vanished from her family's Beacon Hill mansion without a trace. No ransom demands had arrived. No witnesses had come forward. The senator's influence had made this the department's highest priority. Yet every lead had dissolved like morning mist beneath the sun's scrutiny. James ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture of frustration he rarely allowed himself. The photographs before him showed Victoria Aldrich, a beautiful young woman with fair hair and delicate features, smiling at various social gatherings. She had been educated at Wellesley College, spoke 3 languages fluently, and had been engaged to marry a prominent banker's son the following spring. Nothing in her life suggested a reason for voluntary disappearance, yet nothing indicated foul play either. The door to his office opened with a soft creak, and Captain Edward Harrison entered, his weathered face bearing the expression of a man delivering unwelcome news. "Montgomery, we need to discuss the Aldrich case," the captain said, settling his considerable weight into the chair across from James's desk. "The senator was here again this morning. He's threatening to bring in private investigators from New York if we don't show progress soon." James nodded slowly, understanding the implications. Such an action would be a public declaration of the department's inadequacy, a stain on their collective reputation that would take years to wash away. "I understand, Captain. I've been reviewing every detail again, but something keeps eluding me. It's as if Miss Aldrich simply ceased to exist the moment she retired to her bedchamber that evening." "Perhaps," Captain Harrison said, leaning forward, "we need fresh eyes on this matter, someone who might see what we've missed." Before James could respond, a commotion in the outer office drew their attention. Raised voices, one belonging to Sergeant O'Brien, the other distinctly feminine and remarkably composed, despite the sergeant's obvious agitation. "Madam, you cannot simply walk into an active police investigation," O'Brien was saying, his Irish accent thickening with exasperation. "This is highly irregular." "What is irregular, Sergeant, is dismissing relevant information simply because of the gender of the person providing it," came the response, clear and articulate, with the refined accent of Boston's educated class. James exchanged a glance with Captain Harrison before rising and opening the door to his office. In the outer room stood a young woman who immediately commanded attention, not through ostentation, but through the quiet dignity of her bearing. She appeared to be perhaps 26 or 27 years of age, with auburn hair arranged in an elegant Gibson girl style. Her dress, while modest, was of excellent quality, a deep burgundy that complemented her fair complexion. But it was her eyes that struck James most forcefully, intelligent gray-green eyes that met his gaze without wavering, without the coy demureness society expected of women in her position. "I am Detective Montgomery," James said, his voice neutral but not unkind. "How may I assist you, Miss?" "Miss Eleanor Hartley," she replied, offering a gloved hand which James accepted briefly, noting the firmness of her handshake. "I apologize for the intrusion, Detective, but I have information regarding the Aldrich case that I believe you will find valuable." Sergeant O'Brien opened his mouth to protest, but Captain Harrison's voice cut through from within the office. "Show the lady in, Montgomery. Let us hear what she has to say." James gestured for Miss Hartley to enter, noting the graceful way she moved, the straightness of her posture that spoke of excellent breeding and education. Once she was seated, James resumed his position behind the desk, while Captain Harrison remained as an observer. "Now then, Miss Hartley," James began, studying her carefully, "what information do you possess regarding Miss Aldrich's disappearance?" Eleanor Hartley reached into her reticule and withdrew a small newspaper clipping, placing it on the desk with deliberate care. 3 weeks ago, on the evening of Miss Aldrich's disappearance, I was attending a lecture at the Boston Public Library on contemporary literature. The lecture concluded at 9:30, and as I was departing I witnessed something that seemed unremarkable at the time, but has since troubled my thoughts. She paused, gathering her words with the precision of someone accustomed to being doubted. I saw a hansom cab parked near the corner of Boylston and Dartmouth streets. The driver appeared agitated, checking his pocket watch repeatedly. What drew my attention, however, was a small object that fell from the cab when a woman's hand briefly appeared from the curtained window. James leaned forward, his interest genuinely piqued. "What manner of object, Miss Hartley?" "A small ornamental pin in the shape of a swan, detective. I retrieved it, thinking to return it to its owner, but the cab departed before I could approach. The pin is of considerable quality, silver with small pearls forming the swan's body. I have brought it with me." She produced a small velvet pouch from her reticule and emptied its contents onto the desk. The pin gleamed in the lamplight, elegant and distinctive. James picked it up carefully, examining the craftsmanship, his mind already racing through the inventory of Miss Aldrich's belongings that had been documented. "Why have you waited 3 weeks to bring this forward?" James asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Eleanor's expression remained composed, though a faint color rose to her cheeks. "At first, I thought nothing of it. A dropped pin is hardly remarkable. However, when I read of Miss Aldrich's disappearance in the newspapers, something nagged at my memory. Yesterday I attended a charity function at the home of Mrs. Pemberton, where photographs of Miss Aldrich were displayed as part of an appeal for information. In one photograph, taken at last year's spring ball, Miss Aldrich is wearing what appears to be this very pin." Captain Harrison stirred in his chair. "That's quite an observation, Miss Hartley. Most people wouldn't remember such a detail." "I have always possessed a keen memory for visual details, Captain," Eleanor replied simply. "It has proven both a blessing and a curse throughout my life. I notice things others overlook, patterns in what appears to be chaos." James set the pin down carefully, his mind working through the implications. The evening of Miss Aldrich's disappearance, she was reported to have retired to her room at approximately 9 o'clock. The family discovered her missing the following morning. If she left in a cab near the library at 9:30, then she departed willingly, at least initially. Eleanor completed his thought, her intelligence evident in the swiftness of her understanding. Though the driver's agitation, and the fact that she was apparently concealed behind curtains, suggests all was not well, James found himself studying Eleanor Hartley with growing interest. In his years of detective work, he had encountered many witnesses, informants, and concerned citizens, but never one who presented information with such clarity and analytical precision. There was something in the way she spoke, the way her mind seemed to work in parallel with his own, that he found both unusual and remarkably refreshing. "Miss Hartley," he said slowly, making a decision that surprised even himself, "would you be willing to accompany me to examine the location where you found this pin? Your memory for details might prove invaluable in reconstructing the events of that evening." Captain Harrison raised his eyebrows but said nothing, watching the exchange with barely concealed interest. Eleanor met James's gaze steadily, and for a moment something passed between them, an unspoken recognition of kindred spirits, of minds that operated on similar frequencies, despite the vast social gulf that separated a male detective from an unmarried woman of good family. "I would be honored to assist in any way possible, Detective Montgomery," she said, her voice carrying a note of quiet determination. "Miss Aldrich deserves justice, or at the very least, answers. Her family deserves to know what became of her." As James rose from his desk and reached for his coat, a fine wool garment that had seen better days but was still respectable, he found himself wondering about Eleanor Hartley. What manner of woman possessed both the courage to enter a police station unaccompanied and the analytical mind to notice details that an entire department had missed? The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows as he held the door open for her, And stepping into the corridor together, James had the curious sensation that his life had just taken an unexpected turn, though whether for better or worse, only time would reveal. The afternoon stretched before them, gray and wet, but somehow filled with new possibility. The rain had softened to a gentle mist by the time James and Eleanor arrived at the corner of Boylston and Dartmouth streets. The Boston Public Library loomed behind them, its grand Renaissance Revival architecture a testament to the city's commitment to learning and culture. James had arranged for a police carriage to transport them, though he noted with quiet approval that Eleanor had shown no hesitation about being seen in such a conveyance, despite the potential damage to her reputation. As they stood on the rain-slicked sidewalk, Eleanor turned slowly, her eyes scanning the surroundings with the methodical attention of someone reconstructing a memory with precise care. James watched her, fascinated by the concentration evident in her expression, the way her gloved hand gestured slightly as if painting the scene from her recollection. "The cab was positioned there," she said, pointing to a spot approximately 20 feet from where they stood. "The horse was a dark bay, well-groomed but showing signs of hard use. The driver wore a standard cabman's coat, but what struck me was his demeanor. He was not simply waiting for a fare. He appeared anxious, troubled even." James pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket, a habit ingrained through years of investigation. "Can you describe the driver more specifically? Age, build, any distinguishing features?" Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, summoning the image. Middle-aged, perhaps 40 to 45 years. Of medium build, though it was difficult to determine with certainty given his seated position and heavy coat. He had a thick mustache, dark in color, and wore a cap pulled low over his forehead. His face bore the weathered look of a man who spends considerable time outdoors. That description could fit 100 cabmen in Boston, James observed, though his tone held no criticism. "Did you notice anything else? Any markings on the cab itself, perhaps?" Eleanor opened her eyes, and James saw a flicker of satisfaction cross her features. "The cab bore a small dent on the left rear panel, near the door. And there was something else, Detective. When the pin fell, I heard voices from within the cab. 2 voices, both feminine, though one was raised in what seemed to be distress, while the other spoke in soothing, almost placating tones. This new information sent James's mind racing through possibilities. 2 women? You're certain of this?" "Quite certain. I have considerable experience with vocal tones, Detective. My late father was a professor of rhetoric at Harvard, and I often assisted him in his studies of speech patterns and communication. The distressed voice was younger, refined, educated. The soothing voice was older, perhaps a woman of middle years, with an accent that suggested Irish origins, though refined by years in service to a good family." James felt the familiar stirring of excitement that came when a case began to reveal its hidden contours. A lady's maid, perhaps, or a companion of some sort. "That would be my assessment as well," Eleanor agreed. She moved closer to the spot where she had found the pin, her skirt swishing softly against the damp pavement. "The pin fell here, just at the edge of the curb. I retrieved it quickly, but by the time I looked up, the cab was already moving away, heading west along Boylston Street." James knelt at the indicated spot, examining the area with practiced thoroughness, despite the weeks that had passed. Rain and foot traffic would have long since erased any physical evidence, but understanding the geography of the event was crucial to reconstructing the sequence of actions. "Miss Hartley," he said, rising to his full height and meeting her gaze directly, "your observations have opened an entirely new avenue of investigation. If Miss Aldrich was indeed in that cab, accompanied by another woman, it suggests a level of planning and complicity that we had not previously considered." Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "There is another detail, Detective, one that I hesitated to mention for fear of seeming fanciful. But as I watched the cab depart, I caught a glimpse through a gap in the curtain. Just for a moment I saw blonde hair, pale and lustrous, even in the dim streetlight, and a hand, small and delicate, wearing what appeared to be an engagement ring. James felt his pulse quicken. Miss Aldrich was engaged to be married. The ring would have been substantial, distinctive. Indeed, the stone caught the light briefly. It appeared to be a diamond of considerable size. For a long moment they stood together on the street corner, the mist settling around them like a veil, creating a sense of intimacy despite the public setting. James found himself acutely aware of Eleanor's presence beside him, the intelligence radiating from her like warmth from a hearth. She was unlike any woman he had encountered in his professional or personal life, a puzzle as intriguing as the case they were investigating. "Miss Hartley," he said carefully, choosing his words with deliberation, "your contribution to this investigation has been invaluable. However, I find myself curious about something. What drives a woman of your obvious education and social standing to involve herself so directly in a criminal investigation? Most ladies would have sent a note or dispatched a servant with the information." Eleanor turned to face him fully, and in the gray afternoon light, her eyes held a mixture of determination and something deeper, perhaps a touch of sadness that spoke of past disappointments. "Detective Montgomery, I am 27 years old, unmarried, and in possession of an inheritance that grants me independence, but not purpose. Society would have me occupy my days with needlework, calling cards, and the endless round of tea parties that constitute a genteel lady's existence. But I was raised by a father who believed that intelligence was not the sole province of men, who educated me as he would have educated a son." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the library behind them. "When he passed 2 years ago, I found myself adrift in a world that had no use for a woman with my particular abilities. I read voraciously, I observe, I analyze, but to what end? Then I saw an opportunity to apply these skills to something meaningful, to perhaps help restore a young woman to her family, or at the very least provide them with truth. Can you understand that, detective? The need to be useful, to apply one's gifts to some purpose beyond mere decoration." James felt something shift within him, a recognition that went beyond professional respect. Here was a woman who understood the driving force that had shaped his own life, the need to impose order on chaos, to seek truth in a world often content with comfortable lies. "I understand more than you might imagine, Miss Hartley," he said quietly. "Though our circumstances differ greatly, the fundamental desire is the same, to matter, to make a difference through the application of our abilities." A smile touched Eleanor's lips, transforming her face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "Then perhaps we are not so different, detective, despite what society might dictate about the proper spheres of men and women." Before James could respond, a voice called out from across the street, "Detective Montgomery, is that you, sir?" James turned to see Constable Benjamin Walsh hurrying toward them, his uniform cape flapping in the breeze. The young officer's face was flushed with excitement, suggesting news of some importance. "Constable Walsh," James greeted him, "what brings you to this part of the city?" "I've been searching for you, sir. We've had a development in the Aldrich case. A woman arrived at the station about an hour ago, claiming to have information about a cab driver who has been behaving strangely these past weeks. She's a landlady on Charter Street, says one of her lodgers is a cabman who returned home in a terrible state on the night of Miss Aldrich's disappearance." James and Eleanor exchanged a meaningful glance. "Charter Street is in the North End," James said, his mind already plotting the route. "Did this landlady provide a name?" "A Mr. Patrick Donovan, sir. She says he's been drinking heavily since that night, muttering about terrible deeds and innocent blood. She's worried he might harm himself." Eleanor's expression grew intent. "Detective, this must be the driver I saw. The timing, the distress, it all aligns." James nodded, already moving toward the police carriage. Then he paused, turning back to Eleanor with an expression that mixed professional courtesy with something more personal, more conflicted. "Miss Hartley, what I am about to suggest is highly irregular and may expose you to situations unsuitable for a lady. However, your observations have been crucial to this investigation, and I suspect they may prove equally valuable in the interviews to come. Would you be willing to accompany me to Charter Street? Your presence might actually prove beneficial, particularly if we need to speak with the landlady or any female witnesses." Eleanor's response was immediate. "I would not miss it for the world, Detective Montgomery." As they climbed into the carriage, James instructed the driver to make haste to the North End. The vehicle lurched into motion, the horse's hooves clattering against the wet cobblestones. Inside the carriage, Eleanor and James sat across from Constable Walsh, who could barely contain his curiosity about the well-dressed lady accompanying the detective. The journey took them through the heart of Boston, past the elegant brownstones of Back Bay, through the commercial bustle of downtown, and finally into the narrow, crowded streets of the North End. Here, the city showed a different face, one of tenement buildings and immigrant families, of hard work and harder lives. The smell of the waterfront mingled with cooking odors and coal smoke, creating the distinctive atmosphere of a working-class neighborhood. Charter Street was a narrow lane lined with brick buildings that had seen better days. The carriage stopped before number 47, a 4-story structure with laundry hanging from fire escapes despite the damp weather. James helped Eleanor descend from the carriage, noting how she took in her surroundings without visible judgment or distaste, merely observation and assessment. The landlady, Mrs. Margaret Flynn, was a stout woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and capable hands, reddened from years of hard work. She met them at the door, her expression equal parts relief and apprehension at the sight of police authority on her doorstep. "Mrs. Flynn," James began, removing his hat respectfully, "I am Detective Montgomery. This is Miss Hartley, who is assisting with the investigation, and Constable Walsh. We understand you have concerns about one of your lodgers, a Mr. Patrick Donovan." Mrs. Flynn ushered them into a narrow hallway that smelled of boiled cabbage and carbolic soap. "Hi, Detective. Patrick's been with me near on 5 years now, a decent man and a steady lodger, but these past 3 weeks he's been changed, like something broke inside him. He drinks away his wages, won't take fares, and the things he mutters in his cups, they'd make your blood run cold." "What manner of things?" Eleanor asked gently, her refined voice somehow not out of place in these humble surroundings. Mrs. Flynn looked at Eleanor with surprise but seemed to find her presence reassuring. "He speaks of a young miss, a lady of quality, he says. Claims he was paid a year's wages to drive his cab that night, but that the money's cursed, that he should have refused no matter the sum. He says he drove evil itself through the streets of Boston, and that he'll never be free of what he witnessed." James felt the case crystallizing around this new information. "Is Mr. Donovan here now, Mrs. Flynn?" "He is, sir. In his room on the 3rd floor, been there since yesterday morning. I'm worried he might do himself a mischief, which is why I went to the police station." "You did the right thing," James assured her. "Miss Hartley, perhaps you might wait here with Mrs. Flynn while Constable Walsh and I speak with Mr. Donovan." But Eleanor shook her head firmly. "Detective, if this man is in distress, a woman's presence might prove calming rather than threatening. I have some experience with individuals suffering from troubled consciences. My father often counseled students struggling with ethical dilemmas. I believe I might be of assistance." James hesitated, torn between professional protocol and the growing certainty that Eleanor Hartley's instincts were sound. Finally he nodded. "Very well, but you must remain behind Constable Walsh and myself at all times." They climbed the narrow stairs, the wood creaking beneath their feet. The 3rd floor hallway was dimly lit, with doors on either side leading to small rented rooms. Mrs. Flynn indicated the second door on the right, and James knocked firmly. "Mr. Donovan, this is Detective Montgomery of the Boston Police. I need to speak with you regarding events of 3 weeks past." Silence greeted them initially, then the sound of shuffling footsteps. The door opened a crack, revealing a man who matched Eleanor's earlier description, though his appearance was considerably more disheveled. Patrick Donovan's eyes were bloodshot, his face unshaven, and the smell of whiskey emanated from him like a fog. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said, his voice hoarse and defeated. "I've been expecting it, dreading it, praying for it all at once." "May we come in, Mr. Donovan?" James asked, his voice gentle but authoritative. The cabman stepped back, allowing them entry into a small, sparsely furnished room. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a washstand against another, and a single chair sat beneath a grimy window that looked out onto the street below. Donovan sank onto the bed, his hands trembling visibly. Eleanor moved forward, her movements slow and unthreatening, and knelt gracefully so that she was at eye level with the distraught man. "Mr. Donovan, my name is Eleanor Hartley. I was present on Boylston Street the night you drove your cab from the Boston Public Library. I found something that fell from your cab that evening, something that belonged to the young lady you were transporting." She produced the swan pin from her reticule, holding it in her palm. Donovan's eyes fixed on it, and a sob escaped his throat. "The pin," he whispered. "She dropped it deliberately, didn't she? The poor lass was trying to leave a trail, some sign of where she'd been taken." "Taken by whom, Mr. Donovan?" James asked, moving closer, but maintaining a posture that was investigative rather than accusatory. "Tell us what happened that night. The truth, no matter how difficult, is the only path to redemption." Patrick Donovan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet with tears that spoke of weeks of anguish and guilt. "I was approached 2 days before by a woman, well-dressed and well-spoken. She offered me a year's wages to drive my cab to a specific location at a specific time, to ask no questions, and to take 2 passengers to an address she provided. A year's wages, detective. Do you know what that means to a man like me? I could have sent money home to Ireland, helped my aging mother, perhaps even saved enough to start a small business of my own. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I didn't ask questions, just as I'd been paid not to. But when I picked up the passengers that night, I knew something was terribly wrong. The young lady was clearly distressed, though the older woman with her kept speaking soothingly, telling her it would all be well, that this was for the best. The young one kept trying to look out the window, and I could hear her crying softly. Eleanor's voice was gentle. Where did you take them, Mr. Donovan? To a private sanitarium in Brookline, a place called Willowmere Retreat. The older woman said the young lady was suffering from nervous exhaustion, that her family had arranged for her care. But I saw the young lady's face when they helped her from the cab, and, detective, I swear on my mother's grave, that girl was not mad. She was terrified. James felt every piece of the puzzle suddenly click into place. The woman who hired you, can you describe her? Older, perhaps 50 years of age, with dark hair streaked with gray. She spoke with authority, like someone accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed. And she wore a distinctive brooch, a cluster of garnets in the shape of a flower. Eleanor and James exchanged glances. Mr. Donovan, James said, his voice carrying both sympathy and urgency, you are going to need to make a formal statement at the police station. But understand this. Your cooperation now can help save Miss Victoria Aldrich and bring those responsible to justice. You are not the villain in this story, merely an unwitting instrument, but you have the power to make this right. The cabman nodded slowly, relief and determination replacing some of the despair in his expression. I'll tell you everything, detective. Everything. As they prepared to escort Donovan to the station, Eleanor touched James's arm lightly. Detective, I know someone who might be able to provide information about Willowmere Retreat. Dr. Catherine Blake is a physician who has made a study of private sanitariums and their practices. She has been quite vocal about the abuse of such institutions to silence inconvenient women. James looked at her with renewed admiration. You continue to surprise me, Miss Hartley. Your network of acquaintances is proving as valuable as your powers of observation. The evening had descended upon Boston with that particular quality of autumn darkness that arrives swiftly and completely, transforming the city into a landscape of gas lamps and deep shadows. James had escorted Patrick Donovan to the police station, where the cabman had provided a detailed statement that Sergeant O'Brien meticulously recorded. Captain Harrison, upon hearing the developments, had immediately dispatched officers to gather information about Willowmere Retreat and to discreetly investigate its operations. Now, as the clock in James's office approached 7 in the evening, he found himself in the unexpected position of hosting Eleanor Hartley and Dr. Catherine Blake, a formidable woman in her late 40s, whose reputation as both a skilled physician and a fierce advocate for women's rights preceded her. Eleanor had sent a message to Dr. Blake earlier in the afternoon, and the doctor had arrived at the station with remarkable promptness, her black medical bag in hand and her expression one of grim determination. Dr. Blake settled into the chair across from James's desk, her intelligent dark eyes assessing him with the same clinical precision she likely applied to her patients. She was a handsome woman, tall and slender, with iron-gray hair arranged in a severe but practical style. Her clothing was of good quality, but utterly without frivolity, the garb of a woman who had long since ceased caring about society's expectations regarding feminine adornment. "Detective Montgomery," she began, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being heard in rooms full of men who would prefer to ignore her. "Miss Hartley has briefed me on the situation regarding Miss Victoria Aldrich. I must tell you that I am not at all surprised to hear that Willowmere Retreat is involved. The institution has been on my list of concerns for some time." James leaned forward, his notebook open before him. "What can you tell me about the establishment, Doctor?" Willowmere Retreat was founded approximately 8 years ago by Dr. Silas Wentworth, a physician whose credentials are legitimate but whose ethics are highly questionable. The sanitarium purports to provide rest and treatment for women suffering from various nervous complaints, but my investigations have suggested a darker purpose. It serves as a convenient repository for inconvenient women, those whose presence or behavior embarrasses their families or threatens their interests. Eleanor, who sat beside Dr. Blake, spoke quietly. You mean women are committed there against their will? Not precisely against their will in the legal sense, Dr. Blake clarified, her expression hardening. The law provides that a woman can be committed to such an institution if two physicians certify that she is suffering from nervous exhaustion, hysteria, or other mental afflictions. The signatures are easily obtained if one has sufficient money and influence. Once committed, a woman has virtually no legal recourse to secure her release. She becomes, in effect, a prisoner whose crime is being troublesome to those who hold power over her life. James felt anger rising in his chest, a cold fury at the injustice being described. And you believe Miss Aldrich has been confined there under such circumstances? Based on what Miss Hartley has told me about the manner of her disappearance, it seems entirely probable. The question is, who arranged it and why? Before James could respond, there was a knock at his office door. Constable Walsh entered, bearing an envelope sealed with wax. Detective, this just arrived by messenger. The man said it was urgent and waited for no reply. James broke the seal and extracted a single sheet of fine writing paper. The message was brief, written in an elegant feminine hand. Detective Montgomery, if you value Miss Victoria Aldrich's safety and reputation, you will cease your inquiries immediately. The young lady is receiving appropriate care for her condition. Further investigation will only bring scandal upon her family and distress to the patient herself. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Consider this your only warning. The note was unsigned, but the quality of the paper and the confidence of the phrasing spoke of someone with considerable resources and social standing. James passed the note to Eleanor, who read it quickly before handing it to Dr. Blake. Both women's expressions grew steely with determination. They're frightened, Eleanor observed. Our investigation has rattled someone enough that they've revealed themselves through this threat. Indeed, Dr. Blake agreed. And the mention of reputation and scandal suggests that the motive for Miss Aldrich's confinement relates to some perceived social transgression rather than any genuine concern for her health. James rose from his desk and moved to the window, looking out at the darkened street below. His mind worked through the various threads of the case, weaving them into a coherent pattern. Miss Aldrich was engaged to be married to Jonathan Bancroft, son of the prominent banker Charles Bancroft. By all accounts, it was an advantageous match for both families. Senator Aldrich would gain connection to Boston's financial elite, while the Bancrofts would acquire the prestige and political influence of the Aldrich name. But what if Miss Aldrich did not wish to proceed with the marriage? Eleanor suggested, her voice thoughtful. What if she had formed an attachment elsewhere, or simply desired to control her own destiny? Dr. Blake nodded approvingly. I have seen this scenario play out before, Miss Hartley. A young woman of independent spirit who refuses to conform to her family's plans is conveniently diagnosed with hysteria or nervous exhaustion. She is then confined until such time as her will is broken and she agrees to be compliant, or until the inconvenient situation resolves itself through other means. James turned from the window, his decision crystallizing. Then we must act quickly before they have time to move Miss Aldrich to another location or take more drastic measures. Dr. Blake, would it be possible for you to gain entry to Willowmere Retreat under the guise of a professional consultation? The doctor's eyes gleamed with fierce satisfaction. Detective, I have been looking for an excuse to inspect that institution for months. I can claim to be considering it as a referral option for my own patients. Such a visit would not be unusual, and Dr. Wentworth would find it difficult to refuse without arousing suspicion. But you would need to be accompanied? Eleanor interjected. A lady visiting such an establishment alone might seem unusual. Perhaps I could pose as your assistant or a family member seeking information for a relative. James felt his protective instincts war with his recognition of Eleanor's capabilities. Miss Hartley, this could be dangerous. If those who confined Miss Aldrich realize that you are investigating rather than genuinely inquiring, they might attempt to detain you as well. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, and in her eyes, he saw courage tempered with intelligence, determination balanced by awareness of risk. Detective Montgomery, Miss Aldrich has been imprisoned for 3 weeks through no fault of her own, separated from everything familiar, likely doubting whether anyone will come to her aid. If I can help restore her freedom, then the risk is worth taking. Besides, you will be nearby, will you not? I will indeed, James confirmed, his voice carrying a note of something deeper than professional commitment. Constable Walsh and I will position ourselves near the sanitarium. At the first sign of trouble, we will intervene." Dr. Blake looked between them with an expression of knowing amusement. "Then we have a plan. I shall send a message to Willowmere Retreat this evening, requesting an appointment for tomorrow afternoon. That will give us time to prepare and for you, Detective, to arrange whatever official support you might require." As the meeting concluded and Dr. Blake departed to compose her message, Eleanor lingered in James's office. The gas lamps cast a warm glow across the room, creating an atmosphere of intimacy despite the institutional setting. James found himself acutely aware of Eleanor's presence, of the way the lamplight caught the auburn highlights in her hair, of the intelligence and courage that radiated from her like an inner light. "Miss Hartley," he began, then paused, searching for words adequate to express his conflicted feelings. "Eleanor, if I may be so bold, I must confess that your involvement in this case has been extraordinary. You have demonstrated abilities that would be remarkable in any investigator, regardless of gender. But I find myself concerned for your safety in a way that goes beyond professional responsibility." Eleanor's expression softened, and she took a step closer to him. "James," she said, using his given name for the first time, and the sound of it on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "I have spent 2 years living a half-life, going through the motions of existence without purpose or meaning. These past 2 days working alongside you on this investigation, I have felt more alive, more myself, than at any time since my father's death. Do you understand what that means to me?" He did understand, more than she perhaps realized. In Eleanor, he recognized something of himself, that driving need to apply one's gifts to meaningful purpose, to stand against injustice even when the odds seemed overwhelming. But he also recognized something else, something that had been growing since the moment she walked into his office with her precise observations and unwavering gaze. "I do understand," he said quietly, "and I must confess that your presence has affected me in ways I did not anticipate. You have challenged my assumptions, expanded my perspective, and demonstrated that partnership in investigation need not be limited by the arbitrary constraints of gender. But more than that," he trailed off, suddenly uncertain, aware that he was treading on dangerous ground. Eleanor was a woman of good family and independent means, while he was a detective of modest income and uncertain social standing. The gulf between them was real, reinforced by every rule of society and propriety. Eleanor closed the remaining distance between them, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. "More than that, we have found in each other something rare and precious. A meeting of minds, certainly, but also a meeting of souls. I feel it, James, and unless I am very much mistaken, you feel it as well." James covered her hand with his own, the contact sending electricity through him despite the layers of fabric between their skin. "I do feel it, Eleanor, but I am also aware of the complications, the obstacles that society would place in our path." "Then let us deal with those obstacles after we have rescued Miss Aldrich," Eleanor said, her voice carrying both pragmatism and hope. "One challenge at a time, Detective. First, we restore a young woman to freedom and safety. Then, perhaps, we might explore what this connection between us could become." The following afternoon found Dr. Blake's carriage approaching the gates of Willowmere Retreat. The sanitarium occupied a substantial estate in Brookline, set back from the road behind high walls and mature trees that provided privacy and isolation in equal measure. The building itself was a large colonial revival structure, its white columns and symmetrical facade presenting an image of respectability and refined care. But to Eleanor's discerning eye, there was something ominous about the place, a sense of secrets hidden behind elegant architecture. Dr. Blake, dressed in her professional best with Eleanor beside her in the role of concerned niece, was received by a thin, severe-looking woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Thornton, the sanitarium's head matron. The woman's eyes were cold and assessing, her smile practiced but empty of genuine warmth. "Dr. Blake, we are honored by your interest in our establishment," Mrs. Thornton said as she led them through the main hall. "Dr. Wentworth unfortunately has been called away on urgent business, but I am authorized to provide you with a complete tour of our facilities." The interior of Willowmere Retreat was tastefully appointed, with comfortable furnishings and artwork that suggested cultivation and care. But Eleanor noticed details that troubled her. Windows fitted with locks on the outside, doors that could only be opened with keys carried by the staff, and an atmosphere of controlled quiet that seemed more prison-like than therapeutic. As Mrs. Thornton led them through the common rooms, Eleanor scanned each space for any sign of Victoria Aldrich. The patients they encountered were mostly women of various ages, some engaged in needlework or reading, others staring vacantly into space with the dulled expressions of those heavily medicated. It was a deeply disturbing sight, made more so by Mrs. Thornton's cheerful descriptions of the various treatments employed. "And here we have our rest therapy rooms," Mrs. Thornton announced, opening a door to reveal a corridor lined with small chambers. "For patients requiring more intensive treatment, we employ Dr. Weir Mitchell's methods: complete bed rest, isolation from stimulation, and a carefully regulated diet." Dr. Blake's expression remained professionally neutral, but Eleanor could sense the barely contained outrage beneath her composed exterior. "And how long are patients typically confined to such treatment?" "As long as is necessary for their recovery, of course," Mrs. Thornton replied smoothly. "Some cases require only a few weeks, while others may need months, or even longer." Eleanor's heart pounded as they passed door after door, wondering which might contain Victoria Aldrich. Then, as Mrs. Thornton paused to unlock a door at the end of the corridor, Eleanor heard it. A voice, young and feminine, speaking with quiet but unmistakable desperation. "Please, you must listen to me. I am not ill. I do not belong here. My name is Victoria Aldrich, and I am being held against my will." Mrs. Thornton's expression hardened, and she moved quickly toward the door from which the voice emanated. But Dr. Blake was faster, positioning herself deliberately in the matron's path. "That voice sounds distressed," Dr. Blake said firmly. "As a physician, I must insist on being allowed to assess the patient's condition." "That patient is under Dr. Wentworth's direct care," Mrs. Thornton replied, her voice sharp with warning. "She is not to be disturbed." But Eleanor had already moved past them both, her hand on the door handle. The door was locked, but through the small window set high in the door, she could see a young woman with blonde hair, her face pale but beautiful, despite the obvious strain of her ordeal. It was unmistakably Victoria Aldrich. "Miss Aldrich," Eleanor called through the door. "My name is Eleanor Hartley. Detective James Montgomery and I have been searching for you. Help is here." Victoria's face appeared at the window, her eyes widening with hope and relief. "Thank God. Please, you must get me out of here. My aunt arranged this, working with my fiancé's family. They said I was being hysterical, that I needed treatment. But it's not true. I only wished to delay the wedding, to have time to consider my future. They couldn't allow that. So they had me declared incompetent and committed me here." Mrs. Thornton grabbed Eleanor's arm roughly. "You are interfering with medical treatment. I must ask you to leave immediately." But Dr. Blake drew herself up to her full height, her voice ringing with authority. "I am a licensed physician, and I have just witnessed evidence of wrongful confinement. Unless you wish to face criminal charges as well as professional censure, you will unlock that door immediately and release Miss Aldrich into my custody." The standoff might have continued, but at that moment, James burst through the corridor doors, Constable Walsh and 2 additional officers at his back. His eyes found Eleanor first, assessing her safety, before turning to Mrs. Thornton with the full weight of police authority. "Matron Thornton, I am Detective James Montgomery of the Boston Police Department. I have here a writ of habeas corpus requiring the immediate release of Miss Victoria Aldrich. You will open that door now, or you will be charged with obstruction of justice and unlawful imprisonment." The matron's resistance crumbled in the face of official authority. With shaking hands, she produced a key and unlocked the door. Victoria Aldrich emerged, weak from her ordeal but unbowed in spirit. Eleanor caught her as she stumbled, providing support as James and his officers secured the scene. "You're safe now, Miss Aldrich," Eleanor said gently. "We're taking you home." Victoria clutched Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. "How did you find me?" "I had lost all hope that anyone would come. A detective who doesn't give up and a pin in the shape of a swan," Eleanor replied with a slight smile. "Sometimes the smallest clues lead to the most important discoveries." The scandal that erupted following Victoria Aldrich's rescue from Willowmere Retreat shook Boston's high society to its foundations. The subsequent investigation revealed a conspiracy that reached into some of the city's most prominent families, exposing the dark practice of using medical confinement to control inconvenient women. Senator Aldrich, upon learning of his sister's role in his daughter's imprisonment, had immediately severed all ties with her and publicly denounced the conspiracy. The engagement to Jonathan Bancroft was dissolved, and both the Bancroft family and Dr. Silas Wentworth faced criminal charges for their involvement in the unlawful confinement. It was now 3 weeks after Victoria's rescue, and a cold December rain fell upon Boston as James sat in his office, reviewing the final reports on the case. The prosecutions were proceeding well, thanks in large part to Patrick Donovan's testimony and the detailed statements provided by Victoria herself, who had proven to be a woman of remarkable courage and resilience. Dr. Blake had taken Victoria under her care immediately following the rescue, and the young woman had recovered both her physical health and her determination to live life on her own terms. Captain Harrison entered the office, a rare smile on his weathered face. "Montgomery, the commissioner himself has asked me to convey his personal commendation for your work on the Aldrich case. The resolution has been noted by the governor, and there is talk of reforms to the laws governing private sanitariums. You've done exceptional work." James stood and accepted the captain's handshake. "Thank you, sir, but I cannot take sole credit. Without Miss Hartley's observations and involvement, we might never have found Miss Aldrich in time." Harrison's smile widened knowingly. "Ah, yes, Miss Hartley. An extraordinary woman from what I've observed. I understand she has been spending considerable time at the station these past weeks, assisting with witness interviews and case documentation." "She has proven invaluable," James confirmed, feeling warmth rise to his face. "Her analytical abilities and attention to detail are remarkable. She has a natural aptitude for investigative work." "Indeed. Which brings me to an unusual proposal, Montgomery. The commissioner and I have been discussing the possibility of creating a position for civilian consultants on cases that might benefit from, shall we say, a different perspective. Miss Hartley's contribution to the Aldrich case has demonstrated the value of such an arrangement. Would you be willing to serve as liaison for such a program?" James felt his heart accelerate with excitement and possibility. "I would be honored, sir, and I believe Miss Hartley would be as well." After Captain Harrison departed, James sat alone with his thoughts, the rain continuing its gentle percussion against the windows. The past month had transformed his life in ways he could never have anticipated. The Aldrich case had been resolved with justice served and a young woman restored to freedom. But more personally, more profoundly, he had found in Eleanor Hartley something he had not even known he was seeking. A true partner, someone who understood not just his work but the fundamental drives that shaped his character. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, and Eleanor entered, her burgundy dress darkened by rain, her face glowing with the cold and something more, a light that seemed to emanate from within. "Detective Montgomery?" she said formally, though her eyes sparkled with affection. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Never," James replied, rising immediately and helping her remove her damp coat. "I was actually hoping you might visit today. I have news." They sat together, the familiarity and ease between them a testament to the partnership that had developed over the weeks of working together. James explained Captain Harrison's proposal, watching as Eleanor's expression shifted from surprise to delight to thoughtful consideration. "A civilian consultant," she mused. "It's an extraordinary opportunity, James, to be able to continue this work, to apply my abilities to helping others, to seek justice for those who might otherwise be forgotten. It's more than I ever dared hope for. There's something else I wish to discuss with you," James said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Eleanor, these past weeks working alongside you have been the most fulfilling of my professional life, but they have also awakened feelings in me that extend far beyond professional respect or collegial admiration." Eleanor's breath caught slightly, her gray-green eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made his heart pound. "I am aware of the social differences between us," James continued, choosing his words with care. "You come from a world of education and refinement, while I am merely a detective of modest means. Society would find our connection unusual, perhaps even improper, but I have come to believe that what we have found together is too rare and too precious to abandon, merely because it defies convention." Eleanor reached across the space between them, taking his hand in hers with a boldness that was entirely characteristic of her spirit. "James Montgomery, I have spent my entire life defying conventions that sought to limit me, to confine my mind and spirit within boundaries dictated by my gender and social position. I have no intention of allowing convention to dictate whom I may love or how I choose to live my life. The word love hung in the air between them, crystallizing feelings that had been growing and deepening since that first afternoon when she had walked into his office with a swan-shaped pin and a determination to seek justice. "Then you feel it too," James said softly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm through the fabric of her glove. "This connection between us, this sense of having found someone who truly understands." "I feel it completely," Eleanor confirmed, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "You have given me purpose and partnership, respect and challenge. But more than that, you have seen me, truly seen me, not as society defines a woman of my station, but as I actually am. Do you know how rare that is, James? How precious?" He did know, because he felt the same recognition from her. In Eleanor's eyes, he was not merely a detective doing his duty, but a man driven by principles and passion, someone whose mind and character she valued as much as he valued hers. "There will be challenges," James said, though his grip on her hand remained firm. "Society will talk. Your social circle may not approve. My income is sufficient but modest compared to what you have known." Eleanor's laugh was soft but genuine. "James, I have my own inheritance, remember? And as for society's approval, I stopped seeking that when I realized it required me to pretend to be less than I am. What I seek now is a life lived authentically, with purpose and meaning, alongside someone who values partnership over possession, intelligence over ornamentation." "Then perhaps," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "when sufficient time has passed and the impropriety of courting during an active investigation has faded, you might allow me to call upon you formally to explore this connection between us with the intention of building something lasting." "I would like nothing more," Eleanor replied, her smile radiant, "though I suspect we shall scandalize Boston society quite thoroughly. A detective and a bluestocking forming a romantic attachment based on mutual respect and intellectual compatibility. How terribly modern and improper of us." James laughed, the sound carrying relief and joy. "Indeed, though I believe we have already established that neither of us is particularly concerned with propriety when it conflicts with what is right and true." At that moment, Constable Walsh knocked and entered, carrying a telegram. "Begging your pardon, Detective, but this just arrived. It's from Miss Victoria Aldrich." James opened the telegram and read aloud. "Detective Montgomery and Miss Hartley, I write to inform you that I have enrolled at Wellesley College to complete my education in literature and philosophy. Dr. Blake has agreed to serve as my guardian during this period. I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your courage in seeking the truth and refusing to abandon me to injustice. You have given me back my life and my freedom. I intend to honor that gift by living authentically and fighting for other women who may find themselves in similar circumstances. With deepest gratitude and affection, Victoria Aldrich." Eleanor's eyes shone with unshed tears of happiness. "She's going to be all right, James. More than all right. She's going to thrive. Thanks in large part to you," James said softly. "Your observation, your courage, your refusal to let the matter rest when everyone else might have looked away. You saved her life, Eleanor." "We saved her life," Eleanor corrected gently. "Partnership, remember. Your investigation, your authority, your determination to see justice done. We did this together, James, and I rather think that's how we work best." As evening descended upon Boston, James walked Eleanor to her carriage, their conversation flowing as naturally as breathing, touching on future cases they might investigate together, books they had both read, observations about the city around them. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and gleaming under the gas lamps. Before Eleanor climbed into the carriage, she turned to face James fully, her expression open and unguarded in a way that took his breath away. "James, I want you to know that meeting you, working alongside you these past weeks, has been transformative. For the first time since my father's death, I feel as though I have found my place in the world, my purpose. And more than that, I have found someone who sees the world as I do, who values truth and justice, who understands the need to apply one's gifts to meaningful purpose." James took both her hands in his. Propriety be damned. They stood together in the lamplight, two people who had found in each other something rare and precious, a partnership of equals built on mutual respect, shared values, and growing affection that promised to deepen into lasting love. "Eleanor Hartley," he said, his voice carrying a promise and a commitment. "I believe we are going to build something quite remarkable together. A partnership that defies convention, certainly, but one rooted in truth and authenticity. I don't know precisely what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you beside me." "And I with you," Eleanor replied, squeezing his hands gently. "Though I suspect Boston society is entirely unprepared for what we represent, a new model of relationship between men and women, one based on intellectual equality and mutual respect, rather than prescribed roles and expectations." "Let them be unprepared," James said with a slight smile. "We shall simply continue being ourselves, doing work that matters, seeking truth wherever it may lead, and building a life together that honors both our minds and our hearts." As Eleanor's carriage pulled away into the December evening, James stood watching until it disappeared around the corner. The city around him continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that in the space of a few short weeks, 2 lives had been forever altered. A young woman had been saved from unjust imprisonment, and a partnership had been forged that would, in time, transform not just 2 individual lives, but the very nature of investigative work in Boston. 3 months later, on a crisp March morning in 1896, James Montgomery and Eleanor Hartley stood together in the small chapel of Trinity Church. The ceremony was simple and elegant, attended by a select group that included Captain Harrison, Dr. Catherine Blake, Victoria Aldrich, and Patrick Donovan, whose testimony had been crucial to the prosecutions and who had since found steady work and renewed purpose. The absence of many of Eleanor's former social connections was noted but not mourned. Those who truly mattered were present, and that was sufficient. As James slipped the simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger, their eyes met with complete understanding and unwavering commitment. They were embarking on a marriage that would be partnership in the truest sense, bringing together 2 remarkable minds and 2 courageous hearts in common purpose. "I promise," James said softly, the traditional words transformed by the depth of feeling behind them, "to honor you as my equal, to value your mind as much as your heart, to stand beside you in all endeavors, and to build with you a life of meaning and purpose." "And I promise," Eleanor replied, her voice steady and clear, "to bring my whole self to this marriage, to challenge and support you in equal measure, to pursue truth and justice alongside you, and to love you with complete authenticity for all the days of our lives." The years that followed would prove the wisdom of their union. Eleanor Montgomery, as she now signed her name, became the first official civilian consultant to the Boston Police Department, her keen observations and analytical abilities solving cases that had stymied traditional investigators. She and James worked as true partners, their complementary skills and shared dedication to justice making them formidable advocates for those who might otherwise have been forgotten or ignored. But perhaps more importantly, they built a marriage based on mutual respect, intellectual companionship, and deep affection. Their home became a gathering place for progressive thinkers, reformers, and those who believed that the roles of men and women need not be rigidly prescribed by outdated convention. Victoria Aldrich was a frequent visitor, bringing with her news of the women's suffrage movement and the ongoing fight for educational and professional opportunities for women. On quiet evenings, when the work of the day was done, James and Eleanor would sit together in their study, reviewing case files or simply talking, their conversations ranging across every conceivable topic with the ease of 2 minds perfectly attuned to one another. Sometimes Eleanor would rest her head on James's shoulder, and he would wrap his arm around her, and they would simply exist together in comfortable silence, grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked one such evening, referring to the unconventional path their lives had taken. "The society you left behind, the traditional life you might have led?" Eleanor looked up at him, her gray-green eyes warm with affection and absolute certainty. "Not for a single moment, my love. I found in you everything I had been seeking: purpose, partnership, and a love that honors who I truly am. What more could any person ask for?" "Nothing more," James agreed, kissing her forehead gently. "Nothing more at all." And so they continued, year after year, building a life that defied convention but embodied truth, solving mysteries together, fighting for justice, and proving that the greatest partnership is one where 2 people bring their whole selves, minds and hearts equally valued, to the shared endeavor of building a meaningful life together. Their story became legend in Boston, whispered about in drawing rooms and discussed in progressive circles as an example of what marriage could be when stripped of artificial constraints and built on genuine equality. But to James and Eleanor themselves, it was simply their life, lived authentically and well, filled with purpose, love, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had found in each other exactly what they had been seeking all along: a true partner, a kindred spirit, and a love that would endure through all the years to come.